Thank you. Senator Lyons.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to oppose the Minerals Resources Rent Tax repeal, and I do so for the following reasons. Repealing these bills shows once again that the Abbott government puts ideology first on their agenda, ahead of the interests of companies, of small business, ahead of regional infrastructure and regional development, above the interests of low-income Australians, families doing it tough, above the interests of Australians who value savings, above the retirement incomes of Australians and above the 3.5 million low-income Australians promised a boost to their superannuation. All Australians should, as a matter of right, share in the benefits of the mining boom. After all, multinational companies digging up our precious and non-renewable materials are delivering their profits back to shareholders. Of course, both the Barnett Liberal government in Western Australia and the Abbott government in Canberra have no issue with this. No issue with the sharing of profits with shareholders, but both governments, the Barnett Liberal government of Western Australia and the Abbott government, have a problem, a very big problem, with Australians, and particularly Western Australians, sharing in the wealth created by digging up precious, non-renewable minerals. As the Abbott government wants to take away tax cuts to 2.7 million small businesses, Labor's assets write-off for small businesses was welcomed by the often struggling and forgotten part of our economy, the mums and dads, the small companies, many in Western Australia. The Abbott government has taken away any opportunity these companies had of expanding and of employing more staff. The Abbott government likes to say it wants to create wealth and jobs, but its actions show the Australian people the Abbott government is a government that just does not care. The Prime Minister has made much recently of his commitment to women. Indeed, he is the Minister for Women, something I must say I struggle with. A male as the Minister for Women, and quite frankly, when asked the question by a Year 9 Newtown High School student, even the Prime Minister struggled to answer. The PM said, "People are male or female," and then went on to say he believed that all that mattered was that people were represented by decent human beings. Then, on International Women's Day, the PM declared himself a male feminist. Well, nobody is fooled by that. The women of Australia don't believe that, and if the Prime Minister counts himself as a decent human being, he has failed to convince the women of Australia of that. And why don't we believe that? Because the PM has done nothing to demonstrate his commitment to women, and in fact has done everything to show that he has no interest in the well-being of women, as this is a PM who is taking away, is ripping out the rights of women in relation to expanded superannuation concessions, ripping money away from the lowest paid workers, 3.5 million workers. And of course what the Prime Minister knows is that these are mostly women workers. I can tell the Prime Minister that losing this entitlement is an issue for aged care workers, early childhood educators, hospital workers, hospitality workers and retail workers in Western Australia. These low-paid, predominantly women workers currently retire with very little superannuation and will continue to rely on the aged care pension for support, at a great cost to government. To top it all off, this bill seeks to abolish the income support bonus, a tax-free payment for the over 50s on the New Start allowance to help meet unforeseen costs like medical expenses, at a time when this government is secretly considering a tax on GPs and a tax on bulk billing. It's taking money away again from people who need it the most. It's a modest payment, $210 extra per year for singles, and just $350 extra each year for couples. The abolition of this payment is opposed by the national seniors. By ripping away this modest assistance, the Abbott government has revealed its uncaring indifference towards those it should be providing support to. So, a government that pays heed to shareholders, but a government who cares little about the Australians doing it tough. As a Western Australian senator, I want to focus on what's happening in my state. This is particularly important, as Western Australian voters have a unique opportunity on April 5th of voting in a half-Senate election. They have an opportunity to send a strong message to the Abbott government that Western Australians won't be taken for granted, and that Australians have a right to a share in the wealth of our country, that wealth does not belong to shareholders, but it deserves to be shared with all Australians. It seems that's a concept the Abbott government doesn't share. Its view is that only big business should share in the wealth of the country, and that this wealth will somehow magically trickle down to the rest of the country, particularly the low-paid, through employment and increased pay. A failed economic theory, if there ever was one. And along with this, what the Abbott government is attempting to do is to further disadvantage low-paid workers in Western Australia by an attack on penalty rates to make these workers earn even less, robbing them of superannuation and reducing their take-home pay. And Western Australians will not be duped by this. They know that voting Labor on April 5th is the sensible and safe thing to do. But what's happening in the minerals resource sector in WA? Well, if you listen to the Abbott government, it's all doom and gloom. Earlier this month, the Fraser Institute survey of mining companies found that WA's resources sector had been identified in the top-rated jurisdiction for investment attractiveness in the world. The top-rated, with no signs of slowing down, something that the WA senators for the Abbott government seem to just not have noticed, or it's passed them by. But this is a survey that's found that Western Australia is the #1 investment opportunity for many companies seeking to do mining. And furthermore, Western Australia's mineral and petroleum sectors during the 12-13 period set a new record value of $113.8 billion, a new record value. And yet, if you listen to the Abbott government, and particularly those Liberal senators from WA, you'd think that the mining industry was in deficit. You'd think no money was being made in mining in WA, because they go on and on about a carbon tax and the MRRT, which is having no impact on investment in Western Australia. No impact. But again, we see a government who's totally committed to just making it up, whatever suits on the day. They don't look at facts. They just rely on fiction. Whatever it takes is what will be motivating them. So that record value was an increase of over 15% on the previous period, showing significant growth in both the industry as a whole and the petroleum mining itself. Not only that, this report goes on to say that WA was rated #1 on a range of key indicators, something again that seems to have passed the West Australian Liberal senators behind. So what were some of those indicators? Well, guess what? #1 for investment attractiveness, not what the Abbott government would have the Australian public believe, not what the Abbott government would have Western Australian voters believe. And it was #1 also on certainty concerning existing regulation. Again, nothing you would ever hear from the Abbott government. The MRRT did not rate a mention. And again, the Abbott government is completely out of touch. I always thought Liberals stuck together, but apparently not, because just 2 weeks ago, on around March 11, the WA Minister for Mines and Petroleum, Mr Bill Marmion, proudly announced that WA ranked as the world's #1 investment destination. And he shouted that in a media release, saying these positive results, and I quote, reinforce that WA has what it takes to be globally competitive. But we know our work is far from done, and it is important not to be complacent, Mr Marmion said. Again, no mention by Mr Marmion of the imposition of good Labor policy. And again, the Abbott government is completely out of touch, and particularly Western Australian Liberal senators, who I assume meet with Mr Marmion, and seem to have missed the major statement that Mr Marmion made just 2 weeks ago about Western Australia being the top investment destination. So Mr Marmion went on to say WA has a dynamic, world-class resources industry which underpins the state and national economies. From their own side, from a Liberal minister in a state government, they seem to have missed that. Completely the opposite, these statements by the minister in WA, the Liberal minister, Mr Marmion, from what we hear from the likes of Senator Gorman and other MP and senators from Western Australia. They are clearly out of touch. They are just running a political, ideological agenda. How can they be trusted when they are so out of touch and out of step with what their own Western Australian Liberals are saying? And again, this is something the Abbott government should be proud of. Just last week, Gina Rinehart, one of their buddies, demonstrated her commitment and her confidence in the future of mining when she announced a $7.9 billion debt package to bankroll the Roy Hill iron ore project. Where did they crow about that, the Abbott government and the WA senators? They don't crow about it because they want to paint this false picture that somehow Western Australia is under threat from the MRRT. That is all they go on about, and they are completely wrong. So the Abbott government has tried to paint a very bleak picture of our future, telling Western Australians that the MRRT is holding mining back, holding investment back, holding us all back. Yet we've seen Western Australia is the #1 investment destination, and we've seen the massive investment that Gina Rinehart has made through the Roy Hill project. But we've not heard that from the Abbott government, and you think that would be something they would be proud to stand up and talk about. But it does not suit their political agenda to do so. So we know what the facts are, and the facts are that Gina Rinehart is here to stay, and those that know, those that have the facts in front of them, unlike the Abbott government, who just prefers to deal in ideological political opportunities, that Western Australia is a good place to invest in. Facts, not ideology. And I remind the chamber, as I'm sure others have done, that this so-called mining tax came about as part of the Henry Tax Review at a very torrid time in Australia, when we were facing the financial challenges of the global financial crisis. And I quote my fellow Labor Western Australia senator here, Senator Sterle, who said at the time, and I quote, "I remember travelling throughout Western Australia in 2010 for the last election. If someone were a visitor to these great shores from another country and they had the misfortune of having to listen to the unfolding Liberal campaign of what they were going to do should they gain government, it would really make me wonder that they could walk and think, how did this country ever make it into the OECD? It really was ridiculously embarrassing. But that's history and we have to put up with it." End of quote from Senator Sterle. And yet here we are again, arguing this matter yet again, facing the hysteria from the other side, the hysteria from the mining sector and some of their mates about what would happen should we share the spoils of the West Australian mining resources, not with shareholders, but with the people. The Labor Party believes that if companies make a decent profit, like our iron ore mines in Western Australia do, that they can afford to and should be expected to put a bit more into building the rest of the nation. Yet, whether in opposition or government, the Prime Minister and the Premier of WA stood behind their mining mates and other poor billionaires and told the people of Australia, the cleaners, the school teachers, the retail workers, that they should vote to axe the tax that these unbelievably big earners would pay to contribute back to all Australians, not just shareholders. And Senator Wong told the Senate last week that the Abbott government is hiding the truth with these repeals. What the ideologically driven Abbott government is doing with the repeal of these bills is giving a tax cut worth $3.3 billion to the biggest mining companies in the world, and at the same time it is hitting Australian families and small business owners with $16.3 billion in higher tax and cuts to benefits, and that is shameful. Repealing the MRRT is retrograde policy. It seeks to enrich those who need no assistance at the expense of those who need it most. WA needs investments from governments to actually build a rail instead of a broken promise, to actually build roads instead of broken promises, to build energy infrastructure. We don't need an Abbott government and a Barnett Liberal government cutting jobs and services. That's what both the Abbott government and the Barnett government want to do. So we already know in WA that we've lost our urban rail. We know from the Prime Minister that the school kids bonus is on the chopping block and that the Prime Minister wants to take money away from hard-working Western Australian families. Only a government with a truly perverse set of priorities would give billions of dollars to profitable corporations while cutting funding for families, health, education and welfare, as well as raise taxes for low-income earners and older New Start recipients. Where is their mandate to take away superannuation changes for low-income workers? Where is the mandate to keep taking and taking from families and small business who are the backbone of this country? There is no mandate. It is their politically driven ideology that's really on show here. That is all they can hold up. And only a sneaky government full of nasty surprises would try to sneak in the repeal of the school kids bonus, which isn't even linked to the MRRT. That's exactly what this government is doing. Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President.